Mayor Drew Dilkens is good enough to give us some time on this day where I'm sure he's going to be very, very busy. Welcome back to the program, Mayor Dilkens. I'm glad to see you.
Thanks, Heather. Nice to be here.
I know people in your community have been bracing for the worst in all of this in advance, in anticipation. Now that it's hit, how does it hit them? How does it hit you?
Well, listen, it's certainly not good news, but it's a little different today than what we thought it was going to be in terms of a 25% across the board tariff. There are some carve-outs, there are some exemptions. I mean, you see the president even acknowledging that his own departments have to figure out a scheme to do what it is that he wants to do. And so there has to be a calculation on goods that are made in the U.S. and not made in the U.S. And it's really difficult for me to understand exactly how they're going to do that. Heather, you've heard me say before that it's really difficult to say whether a car rolls off the finish line in Windsor or Detroit that the car was made in either country, because the parts that go into those vehicles before they roll off the finish line have crossed the border 6 to 8 times. All the way down to Mexico, back to Windsor, somewhere in the United States for continuous improvement. And so it really is a vehicle. These are all vehicles made by the hands of men and women in all 3 countries. So it's going to be a very difficult process for the U.S. to sort of decouple and accomplish the president's goal here, but we'll just have to wait and see. It's certainly not good news today.
It's really interesting. I was mentioning, that 30,000 parts in a car figure, and how all of what you just mentioned was by design to really benefit everybody within the industry. It was just maybe until we know what the impact is, if parts are affected as well, it's hard to know how fully this will affect. But I was hoping that you could just make people understand just how, foundational Windsor is to the automotive story in Canada. I was reading and reminding myself it was the Ford plant like 120 years ago was the very first automotive big scale plant in Canada 120 years ago. This is just the lifeblood of your city, right?
Yeah, it is. We're the auto capital of Canada. Right across the Detroit River is the Motor City, the auto capital of the United States. And Henry Ford came over in the early 1900s, took a ferry boat across the Detroit River over to what is now Windsor, met up with a fellow named Gordon McGregor, and they opened the first Ford factory on the banks of the Detroit River back in about 1904. And they've built cars in Ontario and Canada ever since. And so the integration, it's really hard to describe the integration of this industry between the United States and Canada specifically, because it goes back so long, and all the way even to the 1960s, where we had the Auto Pact, where tariffs were removed on vehicles and parts because there was a recognition by the U.S. and Canada that was a better thing to do for our 2 countries and for consumers, who ultimately have to pay the price of buying these vehicles. That led to the Free Trade Agreement, that led to the North American Free Trade Agreement, that led to the USMCA, which President Trump negotiated and said was the best trade deal ever. And here we are today, dealing with more friction in our trading relationship. I'm hopeful, because there are, again, different goalposts on this, April 2nd and early into May, that smart minds will prevail and that the president reconsiders his position and looks at Canada in a different way than he looks at perhaps the European Union or Asia with respect to automobiles.
Well, when the big 3 automakers went to Washington last time, when he first mentioned auto tariffs, it did have an effect, and he put everything on pause. We will see if there is, again, in this window between now and next week's taking effect, whether there is pressure to be brought to bear. And I'm wondering where you think Canada should play a role in that. Mark Carney, as Liberal leader, campaigning yesterday in Windsor, speaking to and with automakers there. Did you have any chance to have any discussions with him about the crisis and about Canada's response, Mayor Dilkens?
No, I didn't get a chance to see the Prime Minister while he was campaigning in Windsor. When I listen to the $2 billion number, I mean, obviously workers and a lot of folks will say, well, that's great. It sounds like the government's going to be there. But when you unpack what is being suggested, what the Prime Minister's saying is, we're basically saying the U.S. shouldn't do what they're doing because we've created this integrated industry. And now I read in this $2 billion promotion campaign promise that what he's proposing is to do exactly what the U.S. is doing. I mean, it almost makes Mark Carney sound like Donald Trump on this front, that we're going to make everything in Canada. It's not practical. It's not realistic. And so we need to know, and Mark Carney has said it, Pierre Poilievre has said it, I'm sure Jagmeet Singh has said that they're going to be there for Canadians who are impacted. We're all delighted about that. But I think what the Prime Minister respectfully needs to do is get on the phone, get to Washington. It's great that he went to France and to England, but this is our largest trading partner. The lives and the livelihoods of so many Canadians rely on a good relationship with the United States. This is the most important thing that he can do right now, is make sure that you're on the phone with Donald Trump and sort this out.
So pause on all of that. I just want people to follow along if they weren't paying close attention yesterday. The campaign promises from Mark Carney, the $2 billion is called a strategic response fund, and that was for the sector and for workers specifically, in part to help them upgrade their skills. But you are mentioning, he did say, build an all-in-Canada network for auto manufacturing component parts to really focus things on a whole supply chain within Canada, and that's what you're taking exception to.
It doesn't make sense. It's something that would be such a long-term goal. It's almost like the way, frankly, I'm looking at that promise the same way I'm looking at what Donald Trump's doing. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay.
To sort of carve out Canada and Mexico from the relationship we've created, the goal that he's trying to set will not be achieved for a decade or more if people can hang on that long. And so listen, the United States is our largest trading partner. Mm-hmm. We have to sort this out. And we're dealing with a president who is shown to be volatile, who is difficult to deal with. I don't think it matters who we elect as the federal leader. They're both going to have difficulties dealing with the president of the United States. But the thing of most paramount importance right now is to get on the phone, to get to Washington, to try and sort out a relationship that we're going to have moving forward for the next 3 years and 9 months with Donald Trump.
To that end, Mark Carney is back in his role as Prime Minister, and he's back in Ottawa. He's convening his special cabinet committee, which deals with U.S.-Canadian affairs, and they're looking at measures. Potentially retaliatory measures. There is the talk of a conversation by phone with Donald Trump now. That may be a possibility. We don't have any of the details yet. That meeting is set for later today. But it sounds like you want that call to take place. And what else? Would you like to see retaliation right now in response to what we've heard yesterday?
Heather, I hate to say that we need to do something that's going to hurt our fellow Canadians. But in terms of this relationship, we don't have much choice. If the United States is going to hit Canada, we have to use any and all measures possible to send a signal back, economic signals back to the U.S., so that their consumers immediately feel the pain of the decision being made by their president. Everyone knows that a tariff on Canada is a tax to American consumers. The sooner they can feel that pressure and the effects of that tax, the better it will be for Canadians at the end of the day.
And I want to ask you finally, in terms of your own role in all of this, you belong to something called the Ontario Auto Mayors Caucus, communities in which there is a substantial auto industry. Tell me a little bit about whether you're taking any collective action there in the face of this new threat.
Yeah, Rob Burton, the mayor of Oakville, is our chair. Oakville is home to Ford Canada headquarters. Windsor is home to Stellantis Canada headquarters. And so Rob and I and others have been working to put together a coalition of Ford mayors across the United States and Canada. We're hoping to convene a meeting with all of those folks in relatively short order because all of us have a lot to lose. So obviously in Windsor, we're going to feel the effects immediately. We're going to get hit first and hit the hardest. I've always said this, which is why we formed the Border Mayors Alliance. And so we know that auto communities are going to get hit first and hardest in Canada for sure. But in the U.S., they're going to feel a lot of pain. There are going to be a lot of people displaced and put on layoff. Well, this sort of shakes its way through the auto industry and the parts sector. And so it's about really creating a coalition of folks in Canada and the United States who represent their communities and who know what the pain is going to be and who are willing to stand up and say, this just is not the right pathway for the president to achieve his goal.
We'll be following you there in those measures, and I appreciate the time as always, Windsor Mayor Drew Dilkens. We'll speak again soon, I'm sure, and thank you again.
Thanks very much, Heather.